So I'll hand you over to Peter now.
Thanks, Luke.
Okay.
Hi everyone. Well, thanks first of all for coming out on such a dreich morning. I don't think the term dreich really does it justice. I don't know what the Scots word for lashing down is, but anyway. So I've come from, we're based in Renfrewshire, so I've come over to Renfrewshire this morning. I'm not too familiar with sort of this part of the world, West Lothian. I've obviously been familiar with the projects that the Trust have been running, the Elman and Avon and all that, but been to any kind of specific sites as yet, so it's sort of early days. But I welcome the opportunity to sort of get involved because it's an exciting project, and increasingly we're looking at, although that our focus has been Aspen, as a species, obviously rivers, riverbanks is where it does best, where it can be found. So it's a logical sort of partnership really to kind of tie up. So as Luke said, I co-founded Eadha Enterprises about 8 years ago. So Eadha is the old Gaelic word for Aspen. If I can think. So yes, I co-founded with a friend. Well, it's 2011. Eadha Enterprises. So Eadha is the old Gaelic word for Aspen, hence the challenge pronouncing it. So it's a silent D. And if any of you are familiar with the Gaelic tree alphabet, each letter was represented by a different tree, which certainly shows how important trees were at that time to people. And E is represented by Eadha, which is Aspen. And interestingly, the Gaelic meaning of that word is it means the most buoyant of wood. So it tells you a lot about its potential uses, maybe at that time. Some of you may be familiar with some of the other terms as well. I mean, Beath's a town, for example, 2 miles down the road from Lochwinnock, where I stay. Dar's Oak, Darach is a common name. And called to the Calton in Glasgow after Hazel, Hall, and so on and so on. So, Aspen. So as Luke said, this talk's all about Aspen. That is the focus of our organisation. We're very focused. It is the only native poplar in Britain. So its Latin name is Populus tremula, which basically means the trembling poplar. And as you can see, a very beautiful tree. So I will go on to talk a bit about just the sort of folklore and the sort of history of Aspen, then go on to the kind of conservation value of Aspen, the natural history of the species, and then look at the work we've been doing on Aspen, the sort of conservation aspects of it, and then its uses, its importance in the environment, and also in terms of how we can use it in forestry and other uses. So it does have a fascinating sort of folklore attached to it. I mean, I find it really interesting just reading generally about kind of folklore and sort of stories, because it kind of tells us a bit about the tree. So I mentioned the Gaelic. Well, in Greek it means shield, and interestingly it was thought here to be a popular timber for shields because it's lightweight but it's very strong. So it makes sense, you don't want to be carrying around a hunk of oak after all. But also interestingly, another reason was that it was thought to be associated with sort of magical properties. So in a way, it's sort of the bearer of the shield had a sort of an additional protection, if you like. So there's a lot of kind of superstition around the tree, like sort of similar to Rowan. It was planted, outside your croft house to ward off evil spirits. But few people kind of know so much about Aspen. It's probably because the tree survives on its own as a kind of mysterious tree. Often it'd be on its own in a landscape devoid of trees, and typically that's where it's found these days. Often hanging, in a remote crag somewhere up a gully or a clough, high up in the hills. and no one really planted aspen, so there was a lot of superstition around it. If we look at the names again, coming back to the names, there are a few places around Scotland that include aspen in their names. The common one, popular one, well-known one is Cree and Larrick, the aspen tree of the ruined house. But there's some Gaelic names and also Norse names as well. Probably one of the least used names amongst place names in terms of trees, but there are some certainly. My favourite one's Alta Creach and Arran, where I have been. And interestingly, it's a denuded, typical denuded glen, denuded of trees, but the only trees that survive are literally a little stand of aspen high up in a gully. So, you know, your imagination can run riot. Was the glen one big aspen forest way back in the depths of time, you know? So, it is rare. I mean, that's really why we're kind of interested in this thing, or why we got interested originally. I've always been interested in conservation, as my colleague was, and at the time, living in Lochwinnoch, Clyde-Muirshiel Regional Park, basically the equivalent of your Pentlands on the East Coast. We're running a juniper project, and there's a local biological recorder said, great, all this work's been done in juniper, what about aspen? It's even rarer than juniper, and at the time I didn't really know much about aspen. He gave us a grid reference and said, look, that's a 30-year-old grid reference, see if you can find these trees. So, being interested in a challenge and a bit hill walking, headed into the hills, and sure enough, found this remote aspen tree hanging on way up high in the hills. So that kind of got an interest going. And then we attended a conference in 2008, a National Aspen Conference, realised there was a whole kind of underworld of aspen enthusiasts out there, starting to kind of learn more about the tree and its potential kind of uses. A lot of the work on aspen was done in the 90s, where there was a kind of initial survey done, mapped Scotland, and they only found at that point about 700 examples across the country. I mean, obviously now we recognise that's definitely massively underestimated, but still it might be 1,000, 2,000, it's still not much. But you can see down towards the central belt there are very few. I know for a fact there's 5 in Renfrewshire, there's maybe about 20 locations in Ayrshire. West Lothian, well that's a question, and that's something we'll come on to look at. What is the population out there? No one really knows. It hasn't been looked at in any depth. Typically though, where aspen is found, any of these dots, it might be a single tree or maybe a small stand. So it's highly vulnerable. Obviously a single tree can just be blown down in a year, or maybe burnt in a fire or whatever. So, you know, the genetics is highly vulnerable. The hot spots, if you like, are up the Strathspey area. You can see there, sort of clusters, and only in kind of that area you actually get aspen woodlands, which is very rare. But even then, you know, you're still talking quite small areas, maybe a hectare of actually an aspen stand. So the total amount is maybe only about 500 hectares. So I mean, we are talking pretty rare. There are rarer trees. Some of your montane willows are rarer, but it's up there. So here's an example in Strathspey, where you actually have got stands of aspen. This work has been undertaken by Scottish Native Woods, which now no longer exist. They did a lot of work up here, and off the back of them, the Highland Aspen Group was formed, and they did a lot of work mapping, surveying, propagating, planting, and just sort of general awareness raising. And we learnt a lot from them at the time and thought, well, there's more of a need down in southern Scotland, so we'll kind of learn a lot from them and get a project going down here, where we have a much more depleted population. So, of course, part of their project was joining up these isolated remnants. That's typically, you know, the situation here. It's a single tree hanging on in a crag, so it's pretty frustrating when you're trying to find these things, and even more so when you're trying to actually access them and look at them. I'm not a rock climber, but I've certainly gained some skills along the way. This is the Sloy Dam in Dunbartonshire. But ironically, it's one of the most common widespread species in the Northern Hemisphere. So, you know, it shows you that it's very tolerant to a wide range of conditions. So here from tree line to sea level and everything in between. And the thing is, it's a pioneer species. It's one of the pioneer species. So it will, you know, colonise really poor grounds, you know, gravel screes and shoreline, up to kind of thin soils in the uplands. Now, one of the reasons it's rare, and you'll be wondering why it's so widespread, and in fact it's widespread in Scotland, it's just rare, is the situation where it rarely produces seed. When it does, it produces catkins. So it's related to your willows, so very similar sort of seed. But it will rarely flower and produce seed. Thought to be maybe as regular as every 10 years or so. Potentially after a hot, dry summer or spring, the following year it will flower. So maybe next year we might have a flowering year. But of course, because Aspen's so isolated and remote, certainly down here, often we never know when it is flowering. It's just trying to time it right and visit one of those sites to collect seed. And of course, because they're so remote, Aspen is dioecious, which means you either get male or female plants. So of course you need them close by to cross-pollinate. And they're not getting a chance because they're so remote, this remnant population. So that's a kind of big issue as well. What it does do, how it does spread and reproduce, is vegetatively via suckering. A lot of plants do sucker, as you know, and Aspen's probably one of the best at doing that. So mature aspens on the banks of the River Leven, a typical riparian situation. Footpath, and then you get Dumbarton Golf Course here, and to the horror of the greenkeeper, he's having to cut this constantly, this bank, worried that these are going to sucker onto the green. And I mean, this is what it can do, an absolute thicket. Of course, he probably doesn't realise that the more you cut aspen, the more it grows back. I mean, I can put Japanese knotweed in the shade, you know. So again, you'll be thinking, well, hang on a minute, why is it so rare? You know, this thing could be a monster, you know, if it comes away. But of course, it's all down to land management issues, as we all know. In Scotland, we don't necessarily manage our land to the best for trees, plants, biodiversity, you know. Economics often come into play. We've got historical legacy of land ownership and land management. Aspen's a pioneer species. It hates shade. It's a dynamic species. So things like willow, birch, aspen, they want to move around quickly. They'll move into a bare area, colonise it, improve the soils, be a nurse tree, if you like, for other species like oak, and then they want to move on. And of course, if your landscape doesn't allow this movement, then it kind of gets stuck. You've got hard boundaries here where you have forestry and grazing or agriculture. Aspen's pushed to the margins, but it's nowhere to go. If it sends out suckers, they're just going to get eaten by sheep or deer. Where it wants to colonise open edge or moorland type habitats, it might get burnt. You know, too many sheep, too many deer. It's nowhere to go. It gets stuck. So it gets pushed to the margins, you know, to inaccessible crags, and that's where it can be found. So this is the stand at the back of Lochwinnock up in the Ayrshire Heights. Very typical scenario. Not a single tree apart from a conifer plantation in the distance there. And again, you know, so it's a sort of a weird tree. You know, you find these things surviving when nothing else does, and yet, you know, you only have to look Eastern Europe and North America and you think, wow, that's maybe what it could do given the chance. If any of you have been asked the pub quiz question, what is the largest living organism on Earth, there are a few answers that might come up. You know, people often say, oh, it's a giant redwood, it's a blue whale, currently it might be a mushroom, mycorrhizal sort of network. That's maybe the largest area. This is a contender because that is an aspen clone. So that's a single tree that's spread via suckering. So all these trees are basically clones of one another. And that dates back to the Ice Age. So that is possibly one of the longest living organisms. Okay, so the mother tree no longer exists probably, but that organism, if you like, has existed for 10,000 years. 100 acres, 4 million tons, so pretty big. But it gives you an idea of what aspen could look like here, if given the chance. And seeing photos like this really inspire me to think, right, we could really transform the Scottish landscape here. It's all very well propagating one or two trees, but let's think big. Let's think big. The whole clonal thing is an interesting one. I mean, even where aspen's common, it still seems to prefer this clonal suckering mechanism over and above sort of seed production and natural regeneration from seed. So even here, places like North America and Eastern Europe, you have sort of clonal stands, and this is a great photo because it shows the variability between different clones, a patchwork. So different clones are basically all genetically different, and what you often find, they'll come into leaf at different times, flush at different times, they'll have different form, different growth rates, and create this kind of mosaics, which is fascinating. And we're seeing that as well in the work that we're doing with Scottish aspen, even in leaf form and shape, although they're generally, some, you can see the variation there. And there's a lot of research now looking at the genetics of aspen. It's quite a sort of popular area of tree kind of research. Because of course, if you have variation between different clones, theoretically, different clones can be used for different purposes in a sort of productive setting. And I mean, very visually in our tree nursery, we can pick out all these different clones. I mean, it's pretty stunning, just in terms of colour. Often we thought they could spell out our name in the different clones. So it's a beautiful thing. So part of our initial work was, well, to conserve a species, it's all about preserving that initial genetic sort of base, and then use that as a basis of sort of propagation and spreading. Because I say each of these is potentially very vulnerable. So we've been mapping a lot of the country. Now this database was produced and then developed and maintained by Scottish Native Woods originally when they set up the project, and we've been using that and then building on that with our own work. So they did a lot of work in the Highlands, we've been concentrating sort of in the south of Scotland. But through that we have developed a sort of national clone collection, if you like, part of this gene bank. We engaged with forest research out of Roslin, Bush Estate, where they've got their facility. Off the back of the 90s work, they established a clone bank at one of their sites where they had 105 clones. So they gave us access and we took samples of all of them. And that sort of helped us on our way. And then off the back of that, travelling around the country as and when we can, collecting new clones. So basically every time I go on holiday, I'm always looking for aspen trees, to the horror of my wife. She says, oh God, you're not yomping up that hill, or But then again, she's getting her eye in too, so often if I'm driving, she'll be like, oh, there's one. And I'm like, right, take a note. And so she's getting good at it now. So this is Ayles at Craig. So certainly the work takes you to some beautiful remote locations. It's the only chance I got, obviously, to go to the island. It was on an SNH sort of trip. And it's the only tree on the island, and one wonders how it got there. Must have been by seed at some point in the time. Just a little scrubby stand up in the hills there. But it was really thanks to the Forestry Commission that supported a lot of our work in Galloway and Arran, including Ayles or Craig, because in the tree industry they're faced with a lot of issues, the big ones being plant disease, tree diseases, chronic. So in Galloway, they're losing all their larch and ash, of course, as well. And I think we need more species here, and they liked aspen. They, like everyone, they're beginning to realise this is a really important tree. It's the neglected tree. We need more of it. How do they get around this? No one's been growing historically because there's no seed. So none of the big nurseries were growing aspen, and that's why it's just been forgotten about. So we thought, well, if we can crack the nut, be able to propagate this thing, then crikey, you could base a whole industry around aspen at the end of the day and preserve the species. There is one way, well, there are two ways which we'll come on to, but the only way to mass produce it is in a lab, using plant tissue culture methods. So they said, right, you map every square inch of Galloway and Arran, find as many wild native aspen as you can, and we'll build up this gene bank, and then on the back of that, that will maybe provide a stock of trees for the Galloway forest. So I roamed the hills, a dream job for me, over 2 years, and found as many as I could, and I managed to find 80 specimens across Galloway and Arran. So these are some remote spots, deep in the forest. Your typical upland trees just hanging on in a cliff face, again, trying to get these things is a real horror. Sometimes you're really nice stands and they're kind of lower lying glens. This is a really good example of more older aspen and at the edges there, but they've suckered in and created a stand, which you see is a beautiful kind of clone. They're all identical, lovely straight stems. So straight away you look at that and go, crikey, that is a brilliant timber tree. That's a good clone for growing for timber. Look at that. So they can be very variable in their locations and how they grow. So the easy kind of way of growing it, if you like, by hand is by taking cuttings of the roots and capitalising on and exploiting this suckering mechanism. It's pretty easy. Take chunks of roots, bury them in a fish box, and you get lots of shoots coming off in the spring. Then it's just a matter of removing them, potting them up, putting them in a kind of misting unit in a polytunnel. And you can see how productive a bit of root there is. If you can remove each of those, there might be 100 little shoots coming off that root, but it's kind of labour intensive, it's awkward. You can produce trees that way, and that's how we've initially built up this clone collection, just by manually kind of growing them, the cuttings. So each of those pots, if you like, in our little nursery is a different clone from somewhere in Scotland, all labelled up. So we have now about 300 clones, which is good. So it's quite incredible to think that, on the back of this work, in a small, effectively a garden in Lochwinnock, we might have a quarter of the entire sort of gene pool for aspen, in this small area. So it's a very significant little collection. And we're doing very well until we suffered a fire in our Lochwinnock community garden where we're based first. Luckily we didn't lose too many trees, but it sort of set us back a bit a couple of years ago. But we've moved on, and we've continued to propagate. So what we've done now, we've got these nice big trees, 3-year-old trees in pots. So this is giving you an idea of what you could do yourselves. It's pretty straightforward. So once you have maybe a 3-year-old tree, you can remove it from the pot in winter and then take root cuttings of that stock tree, if you like, chop them up in a pot, and presto, more cuttings, and you can keep replicating this and replicating this. So you're only restricted really by the space, your time, the number of volunteers. You can start growing aspen without seed. Of course, that's why it's so important to get the clone collection reproduced, because you don't want to be planting a single clone. Genetically, that's a disaster. So you want to be focusing on your local clones and collect as many as possible, and then be propagating and planting those. And we've been doing a bit of research as well, just on the back of this work. One of our directors is a geneticist at Glasgow Uni, and he did a little student research project, tested 2 clones that were quite close by. The one that I showed you the photo of at Dumbarton Golf Course, and another at Ardmore Point. And fascinating, these clones came out with the same genetic markers, basically the same clone. And it raises loads of questions. So tantalisingly, it kind of shows how maybe Aspen gets about, because guess what's happened is a bit of root has got dislodged from the Dumbarton Golf Course clone, floated down the river in historical times, down the Clyde, got lodged into the peninsula there. This clone could be hundreds of years old. I mean, it's quite a large clone. So that was a fascinating kind of insight there to how it gets about. So, yeah, all very well taking root cuttings, but we're not going to reforest Scotland with Aspen, and that's kind of what we want to do at the end of the day, because we're all Aspen fanatics, really, you could say, unashamedly. So, micropropagation in a lab. You're taking tiny little samples, growing them in a petri dish, and you can produce hundreds of thousands of these things a year. It's not cheap, but if the Forest Commission wants these trees, they're willing to pay for them, and that's really what they did. And it's been a great success. We went down and looked at this lab, and I mean, it's basically a tree nursery in a laboratory. I mean, I couldn't do this job, basically sitting there with tweezers, 1, 2, 200,000, 300, all day long. And tiny wee things, but off the back of that, they can produce sort of 5 centimetre little mini plugs that they then supply to the tree nurseries, and the tree nurseries just basically pot them all in, grow them on for a year, and they have your typical sapling that's plantable. So, off the back of my collection work, they are now producing 250,000 aspen a year, which I've kind of shot myself in the foot because initially I was saying how rare aspen is, but it's now slightly less rare. So it's been very successful, and the Forest Commission have been planting these in the Galloway Forest. I mean, the scale is phenomenal, actually. So it's amazing for me to see that a single bit of root that I collected from a remote one tree hanging off a cliff in the Galloway Forest is now replicated hundreds of thousands of times. It's just amazing to see. And this work's continuing, and off the back of this, I get obviously to grow in our little nursery a population of aspen, a stock of aspen that we use in our own projects to promote the use of aspen, and also as part of the social enterprise model, we also sell aspen as well. So that's kind of how we operate. So I'm going to talk a bit now about the sort of biodiversity of aspen, because this is a kind of key thing, really. It's rare, but importantly, there's a lot of species that are exclusively associated with aspen, and these, of course, are even rarer. And a lot of this information was available from the Highland Aspen Group. They've done a lot of work. So there's things like aspen bracket fungus, aspen hoverfly, and this spectacular plant, the aspen bristle moss, which we all huddled around a tree in Strathspey in the pouring rain, looking at this thing through a magnifying glass. But it's only present at 3 locations in the whole of Britain, so I mean it's significant, not spectacular. And some beautiful moths and insects. But the key thing is that a lot of these things will only survive on a minimum area of aspen, not a single tree. You need a population, sometimes maybe 5 hectares to support some of these insects. So that's why they're so rare. So possibly species reintroduction could be part of the longer term project. Once we have planted our nice aspen woodlands, we can start bringing these things in. I mean, it's deadwood really that is important for some things, in particular the beetles and the flies. Yeah, as I say, 4.5, 5 hectares required, but these things will munch through aspen. And interestingly, my colleague went to Poland on holiday visited some beautiful aspen stands and Riverbanks. I mean, he's a real ecologist. I'm not an ecologist really. And he was fascinated about the amount of life in these aspen woods, you know, and insects and bugs that don't exist here. And they might have at one time, but we never know. They're certainly extinct now. So that was the biodiversity. Now kind of linking into this project, so it's all about rivers and the importance of aspen to the river system, because it's one of the key sort of places where it's found. I mean, I showed you photos of the sort of uplands, and that's the other kind of typical area high, sometimes almost tree line, but riverbanks. So I think we kind of all know how important trees are, especially the anglers maybe in the room, how important trees are to rivers, aquatic systems. It's all down to, you know, the shade they provide, stabilisation of the banks through the roots, the food they provide, the insect life that they support, you know, stuff that most people in the room will know about. You know, they are an important aspect of our landscape, and of course often very vulnerable and undermanaged or neglected. You know, good examples here, you know, showing what it should be like and what it's not. Often in farmed areas, obviously you have livestock coming down, poaching the riverbanks, complete disaster, causing silt to go into the river, clouding it up, and you know, disaster for fish and aquatic life. And this is obviously the work that the Forth Rivers Trust are really focusing on. I got a lot of these slides from the Ayrshire Rivers Trust, who are kind of basically the equivalent. So this is kind of what we want: stable banks, bit of shade, diversity of flow, you know. And yeah, trees can be a habitat for fish. Of course, the roots, place for them to hide, for refuge. Can you see the salmon in the photo? Yeah. maybe not super fishermen that try to find these things, but I mean, yeah, we can have too many trees sometimes. We have too much shade, debris in the river perhaps. But generally speaking, if managed properly, we want more trees along our river. An example of an overshaded one. But you could say, well, maybe, dare I say, maybe controversially, maybe that's because we're missing another keystone species. If I say aspen's a keystone species, the other one, of course, is the beaver. And it's only overshaded because beavers aren't coppicing those trees. That's what would naturally happen, and you wouldn't have that situation. And you'd also potentially not have the situation of large overgrown trees then falling into the river, uprooting the soil. And so yeah, beavers potentially can be destructive, but it's the right kind of destruction perhaps, and yeah, that's another debate. I'll come on to beavers later. And that's not beavers, that's just debris, that's just wind and floods, and so yeah, we have this anyway. That's potentially the wrong place. So aspens, why are aspens good for riverbanks? Well, good thing about aspens is they cast a light shade, just which is good. As I mentioned before, packed full of insects and bugs, great. And of course the suckering, you imagine these roots, I mean they can extend 30 metres, 40 metres and be suckering. So a dense network of roots binding those riverbanks together, and this is actually an aspen stand down in Galloway, and you can see just what they're doing. And that's an example there. You can see, I mean, you can pull these things up and they just go on and on, and the sort of sucker shoots coming off. And of course, they're a wet-loving tree. They're related to willows, so they like to be waterlogged, wet, maybe not constantly submerged, but you know, pretty tolerant. So, I did mention this, and I have to really, because aspens are also the favourite food of the beaver, amongst lots of creatures. And then one asks, because we've got to talk about beavers, they're spreading, we've heard it in the news in Tayside recently, they're getting about. So if aspens are rare, the question arises, is this a disaster for aspen conservation? That would perhaps be your kind of initial thought. Well, I say here a symbiotic relationship which kind of gives you the answer. So I was on holiday in Clonal quite recently and having my dinner in the Clonal Hotel, and I looked over the river, and again my wife's going, oh, you're not looking at aspens? I said, no, there is a beautiful stand of aspen across the river, I'll need to go and check that out tomorrow. But then when I looked closer, I saw what I thought was a stump and lots of wood chips. I thought, oh, this is very tantalising. So sure enough, I had my suspicions, but when I visited, yep, sure enough, a beaver. I was quite surprised they're that far west. But interestingly, it's the only tree that's been targeted by beavers along that riverbank, and it's the only aspen stand for miles, and they've targeted one tree. So it's an interesting one. Are beavers good for aspen? I would say yes, because what they do, they coppice an aspen. If there were no sheep in that field, because the beavers cut the aspen, that would promote suckering. So you would actually get all the regrowth of suckering as a kind of response mechanism, survival instinct. So you get more trees. But also beaver ringbarks trees often without killing them. And again, that can stimulate flowering and seed production in aspen. So of course aspens and beavers have coexisted. The whole point is they've evolved together. So arguably, that's why aspens are rare, potentially. Certainly in our riparian environment, is because we don't have beavers. So you can turn the argument completely on its head and say, well, actually, beavers could be the saving of the aspen. Yeah, we need to plant more to get them in the landscape, but once they're in there, they're away. And here's an example of a place where there is beaver activity. And look at that. But there's no overshading. There's a river here in front. There's no overshading. You just have a thicket which is binding that riverbank together. And the beavers will come in maybe an 8-year cycle. We know this from places where beavers have existed for some time, Banff Estate and Tayside, and they've been monitoring them, and they will coppice an aspen every 8 years. And that tells us, as sort of foresters, if you like, the rotation of aspen production, if you like. So we've really been starting to focus on the rivers, the riparian woodlands, because we know the value of aspen to that. I mean, anglers in our part of the world have been visiting us and have been crying out for trees. Give us trees, we want more trees. And it really opened my eyes. It's an area that I've overlooked and realised that, yeah, people are really grasping this. And, so on the back of that, I've gifted lots of aspen trees to the angling clubs in Ayrshire. I said, look, let's get funding and do a proper project here. So off the back of that, we got funding for the Ayrshire Riparian Woodland project. We engaged with schools, growing 500 aspen each, just potting these mini plugs up and then planting them out somewhere in the local river system. And we managed to plant about 2,000 through this project. And it was really through that then we thought, well, let's replicate this in West Lothian. And I'll just finish off, nearly there now, some of the kind of uses for aspen, because it's all very well talking about conservation, but to conserve any species, it helps if that species is going to pay its way. You've got to find economic uses also with things, and how they can be integrated into the economic system, if you like. So there are loads of traditional uses of aspen. I mentioned shields. Every match in the world is produced by Swedish aspen. Oars and paddles is a common one. Again, lightweight, waterproof, cartwheels. But there are industrial uses, so there are whole industries in the world. Where aspen's common is in North America and Eastern Europe. You have, like for example, Estonia, a whole paper industry based on aspen. So Irvine paper mill at the moment takes, conifers, sitka, pulp. If there's enough aspen, they could be taking aspen, and it actually produces a finer quality product. So you start asking, well, why do we need to put up with wall-to-wall monoculture Sitka? Could we not have a beautiful native, brilliant species like aspen forming the backbone of our forestry industry? Okay, so realistically, maybe not the only tree, but they should be forming a much more important part of it. And yes, there are niche applications as well, like saunas and internal cladding and animal bedding, all these kind of things. But things like paper and fibre boards could form part of an industry based on aspen. You get the best clones, the good growing clones, produce them, plant them, find good. And this they can be planted on poor ground. It doesn't have to be on sort of fertile ground. Aspen will grow anywhere. So that's the sort of potential that we're now looking at, trying to promote the use of aspen. So in terms of the oars and paddles, going back to the traditional use, we've engaged with a few coastal rowing clubs. The forest research collection that I mentioned before, unfortunately, was all cut down, part of an Edinburgh University development. So we said, oh no, they took, we had samples of them, but we said, look, don't waste the timber, give it to a boat building club, you can make them in paddles and oars, perfect, long lengths of aspen. So they're currently doing some trials with that, and we'll see what happens. So, finally, coming back to you guys, this is where we're at. So we want to know a bit more about Aspen and West Lothian. I say it's an area I don't know too well. I've obtained records from BSBI, and there seems to be quite a lot. Of course, probably, I don't know, a large percentage are probably planted. They will include planted non-native aspen, if you like, in their survey. What we now want to know is how many truly native aspen exists in West Lothian. And then we can start focusing attention on the next stage, as Luke said, collect samples, start propagating and start planting. So this is where we need help. I've got some ordnance survey maps over the corner there with each grid score where there's a record of aspen marked. And what we're looking for is volunteers to sign up. It might be an area near your home, or an area where you fish, or an area where you like walking, or just an area you like to visit, and say right, nominate the square or more for each person, and go out there and see if you can find aspen. And if you can, I can provide training in identification and then taking field records, and then it's basically feeding that information back to us, and we can move on to the next stage. So hopefully some of you will be up for the challenge, and we can sort of talk through that over the next sort of half of the morning session. I think that's me. So happy to take some questions of what time.
Yeah, time for questions.
I drive backwards and forwards in the M8 regularly, and I only just noticed this in the summertime when I'm driving down to Hermiston Gate roundabout.
Yeah, there's a
There's
lot
a
in there.
raft of aspen along there, and in the central islands in the middle of the roundabout, and a wee bit along the
It's funny that it seems to be quite
I've never noticed that before.
Yeah. But I mean, they're actually a really good tree, obviously, for motorway embankments, because they knit together the soils. They're salt tolerant, so they grow on the coast, so that they can cope with that. And they like disturbed ground, so actually a good tree for a motorway embankment. Yeah, but they're probably Bulgarian aspen. You see, most of the planted stock, as I say, would have just been imported. We don't know where from, so they're not sort of from a sort of Scottish genetic resource. Yeah, still populous Tremia probably. Yeah.
We fished the upper reaches of the River Ayrshire.
Yeah.
In 1974, it was all the trees and everything dropped over, stones, gravel, all straightened out. That's an ideal area for livestock cultivating the livestock alongside the tree. What we say a wildlife corridor on the side of the river.
Yep.
Obviously, being an angler, I don't want too many trees.
Yeah.
But
it's a balance.
I do see the benefits of having the livestock along the river.
Brilliant. Well, I think that would be another useful aspect of this. Finding, doing the mapping and surveying and finding the aspen, but also identifying good places for it to be planted will be really of value, so, maybe we could put over some maps and we can, that'd be good. I would say, a lot of our angling buddies down the west are basically guerrilla planting, so they don't necessarily speak to landowners, but I say, well, if a farmer, isn't managing our riverbanks,
A little farmer's done like too many trees up
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
they think it causes flooding and that, so we can strike the balance.
Aye. And they'll often shove in the willow rods as well, which is an easy
Oh,
thing.
we've been doing that for a while, like.
Yeah. The thing about aspen is, you can plant a wee sapling, but of course the issue is protection. So when you start getting into the realms of, well, do you just plant a few and accept losses, or you don't want to necessarily then have to stick tubes, and then they're pretty obvious, and then who's stuck all these trees in, and then you get expense and issues there. So it's not ideal, is it? But it's what I didn't actually say was it's one of the most palatable trees, unfortunately, and that's another reason why it's rare. I mentioned the sheep and deer, but they will target an aspen before anything else, unfortunately, and that's a real issue trying to establish woodland with aspen.
When you look at the deer menu, they look at it by like leaves, bark, and saplings, and aspens at the top of it.
Would that make them a risk then for motorway planting? Because then if you're drawing in deer, you're creating, risk on the road for motors.
Well, maybe. It's just a matter of protecting them and getting them away. But interestingly, why are aspen palatable? It's down to, of course, the nutritional value of the trees. And one of the traditional uses of aspen was in agroforestry. So they would, there's photos of Norwegian farmers back in the 50s pollarding an aspen tree, drying the branches, tying the cut branches around the trunk, drying them, and then feeding them to the livestock in winter, because they're packed full of good nutrition. Why is that? Because it's the roots. The roots tap down into the rock, pulling up all those nutrients. So, and that's why they're a good tree for land reclamation, because they remineralise the soil. They're pulling up all these nutrients from deep down, and that's why a lot of our projects have been focusing on kind of land remediation, land reclamation. We've been doing some trials in some of the oak casts down in East Ayrshire. We speak to Ogham Alphabet as well, but not as yet, no kind of opportunities there. But because it's a perfect tree for kind of reclaiming land. So, farmers should even be thinking about planting it as part of an agroforestry system. Let's not keep separating forest, woodlands and livestock and farming. They should be integrated,
You're talking about doing everything with clones. Are you looking at putting in male and female clones so that actually you'll then get the broader biodiversity and
exactly.
spreading that way as well?
Yeah. So the Galloway Arran collection was all genetically tested to see if there was any duplicates, to check they weren't truly native, but also gender tested as well. And interestingly, it came back 50-50. So I've got a record of all these clones that are in production. So certainly part of our kind of unique selling point, if you like, our product when we're selling trees is that we can match your site with the clone. So we can match elevation aspect, all of that. We can select the right clone for your site, and then we can give you male and female, variety, and a good mix, 50-50 whatever, for your site. So that is very much. But we know that the more we plant, they're the future seed orchards of the future. So every wood we plant potentially could produce seed and allow it to spread. They will flower and seed at some point. But we're basically a dating agency for aspen, really. Yeah.
So do you supply the angling clubs or
Yeah, so we, we sell to we sell trees and we donate trees. I mean, we're a charity, we're
Aye.
a charity, so, you know, we donate small amounts, we raise, we bring in revenue through
What
sales.
kind of money are you talking about though?
Well, I mean, so you go to a tree nursery and buy a birch tree, for example. If you buy 1,000, it's maybe down at 40p a tree, something like that. Now, aspen's an expensive end of a broadleaf species, so, you know, for large quantities, there might be £1 or whatever a tree. That's the sort of, they're more expensive than a standard.
I would think you would find that you probably get grants for that type of
Yeah.
white buying. Well, I'm reckoning I could probably get grants to
Yeah.
get trees off you for
Yeah.
planting on the haven. Like.
Yeah, well,
One of the schools we're hoping to work with George for the Aspen project is once we get to this kind of schools stage, is we're hoping to use the Aspen as a kind of fish in the classroom thing, Aspen in the classroom, and hopefully with Clonal primary. And when we do that, Peter will sort of supply plugs for them to grow on, and then they'll go and plant probably down on the Avon.
yeah.
So that's kind of worked into the project a wee bit anyway, is planting some aspen on the upper Avon up here. Patch.
Yeah, so it's the best way to, if anyone has good sites or possibilities for tree planting for aspen, then get in touch with us with a good reference, a wee map, extract or whatever, because the more sites we have, the better,
Yeah,
really.
absolutely.
How does that work with the SSSI sites?
It's just, you know, you need to go down the route of getting permission, speaking to SNH, depending what management regimes in place, they'll decide, but we're planted in the SSSI at Lochwinna. We just said, I mean, there was already willow, sort of car woodland forming, and we just said, look, it's a missing component here, and of course they're very supportive of that, and they're all coming away lovely, lovely colder here in Lochwinna. Yeah.
What you mentioned the Forestry Commission buying plants off of the plant down in Galloway. What is that? Are they planting that as a product or
Yeah.
for biodiversity?
That's a good question, because initially Galloway Forest District are pretty clued in. They're forward thinking. Rob Suter, former district manager, is an ecologist, not a forester, and that says it all. He really drove forward the tree line restoration, so that kind of rare habitat above the forestry plantations, trying to landscape it all, naturalise it, and off the back of that they were putting in thousands of hectares of upland woodland, native woodland. If you got the Merrick, Loch Trail for example, that was a good example. So the aspen was going in there with the juniper and your willows, but they've moved on from that, and certainly I've been trying to promote it as well in productive forestry. And you'll see I've got a report there on the table, amongst other information. I've been researching this in Norway and North America. Aspen's planted with spruce in productive forestry. And in particular Norway, where it's Populus tremula and it's Norway spruce, they plant it together in mixed species because they know that you get better productivity. Aspen is good for the soils, like I say, and helps with spruce production, and also sort of there's a symbiotic kind of relationship. It helps provide protection elements, etc. So together, I know all the kind of soil benefits, the mycorrhizal networks associated with aspen benefits the spruce, and the forestry industry knows this. You know, mixed species often have better results. But also seeing the aspen as a potential product as well. Don't overlook the aspen. Increasing the saying, well actually this is a good timber tree. It's just finding it. It's just a chicken and egg. Once you're up to a critical mass of aspen, you can start using it and selling it. But they're putting in some mixed trials, which I will like to use in the future as kind of trials and sort of demonstration projects. So we'll be monitoring them, seeing how they do. And I've been trying to promote landowners planting mixed trials as well with Sitka or whatever and aspen. I definitely think it's got mileage, and I mean you can imagine the landscape benefits of, you know, a dark, looming kind of foreboding Sitka plantation dotted with golden aspens in the autumn. I mean, and the biodiversity benefits. I mean,
Nice. Yeah.